Good morning, everyone. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webcast today. I'm Catherine Barrett with O'Reilly Media, and I'm your host for today's event. I'm listed as O'Reilly Media in the participants box, and if you need to send me a message or ask me a question during the presentation, just direct it to O'Reilly Media. I also want to say, for some reason, you are not viewing all the attendees, and I had set it so that you would be able to see the other people who are participating. If it just shows that you're the only person here, you're not the only person in this presentation. There are quite a large number here today. Now today our presenter is Joshua Michelle Ross of O'Reilly in Practice. How are you today, Josh?
I'm good. Too much coffee, but otherwise good.
Oh, good. Coffee's not bad. So Josh's topic is the Evangelist Toolkit, a field guide to bringing social techniques into your operation. It's an important topic because while we understand the importance and advantages of using the various social media tools, getting buy-in from your boss or your colleagues is another matter, as a lot of us have found out. And Josh is going to tell us how to do just that. Now, before we begin, if you're experiencing any difficulties, please send email to webcast@O'Reilly.com, and we're monitoring that throughout the presentation, and we will get back to you as soon as we can. I want to remind you something of the nature of webcasts. Sometimes images take a while to load and render on your screen, and there's really nothing that we can do about it. It's usually due to the bandwidth, your bandwidth. But if it is a problem, send me a chat message and let me know, because I'd like to have that feedback. Also, we want to share your comments and questions with the entire group. And I had asked that you would post them to all participants, but I don't see that that's a feature that's available to you. So if you'll send your questions and your comments via the chat window to me, then I will repost them for the entire group to see, and that way we can get everyone taking part in the conversation. Josh is going to allow plenty of time for questions, so feel free to submit them whenever you like. And again, use the chat window and be sure and go ahead and send them to me, and Josh will get to them after he finishes his presentation. And now, without further ado, let's have Josh tell us about the Evangelist Toolkit.
Great.
There you go, Josh.
Okay, let me just go to share. I'm going to share my application with everyone here. Okay, so it should be rendering now. Let's see. And everyone should be seeing that rendering in full,
great.
Glorious black and white.
Yep.
So thanks, Catherine. And as Catherine mentioned, I work with O'Reilly Media, specifically the In Practice group, which, as its name suggests, we help people bring these types of tools and technologies into their organizations. So we do that in a number of ways. There's some strategic consulting that we do, but a lot of what we do is bring workshops in where we can give these ingredients to people to start mixing and innovating upon. And that can be a very powerful tool for getting people to understand the impact they can have specifically in their business. And it's a lot of fun. Today, I want to talk to you about bringing technologies into your organization, and specifically, why that topic. A couple of reasons. One, the obvious one, as you see here, this is from 2006, which I think is funny, but organizations should operate all revenue-generating lines of business on a Web 2.0 model by 2008. It's 2008, and we obviously aren't there yet. But it's still extraordinarily important, and we'll talk about it in terms of every different business unit inside the company. The power of unlocking human ingenuity through collaboration and through these social technologies is really transforming a lot of different businesses. And specifically, what happens when I go out and give talks is I tend to get questions all along, well, how do I convince my boss? Or how do I build a team around this? Or how do I develop a culture that's tolerant of a lot of these issues? Or how do I address this specific challenge in my company? Because one of the things which we will talk about is that social technologies challenge traditional business structures, right? So it requires a different way of thinking. And so a lot of the what of social technologies, what are they, is easy to answer. The how, meaning how we get them into our organization, is a lot harder. And that's what we want to talk about today. very quickly, I just want to do a level set on Web 2.0. At the broadest level, Web 2.0 is understanding the operating principles that govern networks and applying those principles to business. And so for the last 5 years, Tim O'Reilly has really led the charge on understanding, the value of data in transforming business operations, harnessing collective intelligence, things like that. There's also a social aspect to Web 2.0, and that's what this talk focuses on. This talk focuses on how these tools allow us to collaborate, share, and create and co-create in new ways. And that's really what I specifically want to focus on today. I'm going to move fairly quickly through the talk because, as Catherine said, I'd like to get conversational. And I also have posted some of this stuff on a blog site for you to look at afterwards in more detail. So I'm going to move at a higher level and kind of review the model for change that I have and take questions, and then there'll be follow-up on the blog so we can be very interactive with this. So by social technologies, I just mean things that you're all probably very familiar with: blogs, wikis, social networks, microblogging like Twitter, ratings and reviews, social bookmarking, tagging, and idea exchanges, things like that, all of them sharing a common feature. They allow everyday users, non-technical users, to find, create, share, interact, and collaborate. And why is that so powerful? Well, it really is ushering in this age of participation for people. For the first time, we can find each other, we can organize and collaborate without any formal organization or need of physical proximity, which is really revolutionary. The cost of that organizing has dropped to near zero, which changes everything. It's a new mode of production, so we're seeing this idea of crowdsourcing, most commonly understood something like Wikipedia, but also more broadly, that's being brought into all kinds of organizations, even very traditional ones like Procter & Gamble now do about 35% of their innovation outside of their employee base, right? They reach out to a broader audience through tools like InnoCentive, and they have people coming up with ideas for products. It also transforms the relationship between customer and company, and this is the part that I really want to kind of emphasize here, is there's a technology enabler, but it's the social effects of this that are really, really radical. So how does it do that? Well, that's what I would say are the business implications of the social web. First off, we live in a multicast world. And this is the technical side of it, right? We've moved from one-to-many distribution to many-to-many. So down on the lower left, you have this old broadcast model, which I'm sure you've heard a lot, where, the company was the broadcast tower, and it had this one-to-many relationship to customers. All the innovation happened inside the tower and was pushed out through marketing, out to these various groups. Or customer service worked like this. Government actually worked like this. But we're moving to this many-to-many, which is over there on the right, where people, as a consequence, now self-organize. They look to each other for support, for validation, and that's the social impact of this. Recently there was a study that showed that 65% of people would rather interact with a total stranger about a company's products and services than that company themselves, right? This follows a very real-world example. When you go to your friend or your neighbor who's the go-to person for a piece of technology or recommendation and you want something, it's a level of trust that you have with that person that they're going to give you a positive recommendation and an unbiased one. So now on the internet writ large, we can do that at scale, right? So people are now looking to each other, and this is why it's so important to understand how these technologies work, both inside and outside of companies. The other piece here is that the edge, meaning your customer, holds more potential power and productivity than the center. So again, that right-hand diagram, there's more talent and potential productive power outside of your organization than could ever be housed inside of it. So how do we start tapping into that? If there are people on the call that are inside looking at kind of what we call Enterprise 2.0, which is using these tools inside of your firewall, this is also really important. People in human resources for decades have been talking about what they call the informal organization, meaning the organization that is not about roles and responsibilities and who reports to whom, but how work actually gets done, meaning, the hallway conversations, the tacit knowledge that certain people have about the way business really works. And we're seeing social tools being used inside of companies now to unlock a lot of the power of the informal organization, right? And we're going to talk about that in just a moment. So businesses also, the implications are need to reorganize around the customer. This shift in power requires us to kind of think differently now about marketing, about everything. So it applies to every business unit, right? So from a marketing perspective, how we connect with and sell to customers. From consumer insight is how we're understanding those customers, how we get feedback. The age of the 12-month persona study is still alive and well, but I would suggest that there are much more immediate ways to reach out and understand who our customers are. From an innovation perspective, how we source new goods and services, there's extraordinary potential to reach out into and to co-create. Human resources, recruiting, retaining, and managing talent is a completely different game in the era of, global job posting services. LinkedIn with my network has, my indirect network has almost 1 million people in it, right? And how they manage talent changes. And with IT, obviously, how we align technology to business process. So this is the model that I want to share with you today and walk through fairly quickly about how to bring social technologies into your organization. I realize that there are a lot of different folks on the call. There are people who are looking to bring it inside the company in an enterprise 2.0 fashion, meaning let's use it inside, like a wiki for doing the annual report. Or there are others who are saying, look, I want to reach out to marketing, and I know there are also some consultants saying, how do I actually convince my client that this is a good thing to do? So let's share the model and then talk about it. So here it is. 5 basic steps. You may be at a different place or a different point in any one of these steps. Let's just walk through it and kind of then start that conversation. So the first step is listen, and we'll talk about the power of doing that. The next one is find allies, and I'll talk about what I mean by that. And share stories, which is critical. Create your project, seek challenge, and make the case. So let's do each one of these really quickly. You can just, all right, so I wanted to get down to some real brass tacks here and just give some action steps around certain parts of the model, specifically with listening. And I also wanted to let you know that if you go to opposableplanets.com, the post there that I put up the other night has these different steps in much more detail with links and things like that. So you can go there if you have questions. There was already a comment on there about some other tool that someone uses that's really powerful for them to kind of help listen in onto the social web. And the value of listening, I think I kind of passed by that slide a little bit too quickly, is that there are so many conversations already taking place likely about your company already. I had a conversation just last week with someone who runs a small chain of restaurants in one state, and they were stunned to find that there are 37 groups on Facebook dedicated to their restaurant. And they were just amazed that all of a sudden there's this community already existing that they could tap into. How would we talk to these folks? What would we say to these people? What way can we keep them engaged? So listening and finding out what's already out there is really, really powerful. I have another friend who works for one of the major clothing retailers in the country, huge. And they've been putting off stuff on the social web forever. And she took some of these listening action steps and built a case for going out with onto the social web by finding out just how much reference is going on to them in the blogosphere. So the first piece, and this is how she did it, is to set up Google Alerts. This stuff is very tactical and basic, but you can just, and you can go to Opposable Plans for the links and things, but Google allows you to type in any types of keywords or combination of keywords, and they will email you every day for what's happening on the web and in the blogosphere related to those things. So it could be competitive insight you're looking for. I do it on my name just because I go out and do speaking and conferences, and I'll find people talking about stuff, and it's interesting. So even someone as small as myself, much less a company, can really just pay attention to what's happening. Search the social networks and technorati for your company. I was at a major another major retailer, and this woman was telling me that none of her employees were on social networks, and she was in HR. And we did a search and found multiple groups dedicated to talking about how her company sucked, which was kind of disheartening for her, but there was so much conversation going on about that really related to her and the satisfaction of her employees. Search Technorati for your company as well. It's another blog search tool to look backwards in time and say, what has the conversation been about? Set up Twirl if you want to eavesdrop on microblogs, things like Twitter. Again, you can go to the website to get more data on this stuff. But there's a lot of conversation going back and forth. We've just seen recently one of the Comcast employees now, customer service employees, is now using Twitter to deal with Comcast issues, and also using Twirl to find out what's happening and what types of conversations on Twitter are relating to Comcast. Create a NetVibes account or another RSS reader to listen in on blogs and magazines regularly. A lot of people use RSS in different ways, but NetVibes allows you to basically aggregate all of the information you want on your browser's homepage every day. And it's extraordinarily powerful as you start to listen and see what's out there to bring that customized newspaper basically to your desktop every day. Saves me hours and hours just kind of for what's going on in the world. And there are a lot of people talking about social media in both inside the workplace and social media as a tool for marketing and innovation. And you just basically start to scan these every day and build your set of stories and case studies that reply to your business. The next piece is create a Delicious account to tag and share what you find. This will come to the next stage of kind of allies and people inside the company that agree with you, but find a way to start storing and keeping these pieces of information very simply. So those are listening action steps. I wanted to show something that I think, I talk about Best Buy a lot. They've been a client, but they're also a company that does things so well. I wrote a post on the Radar, on O'Reilly Radar, about Best Buy's new business strategy. Within about an hour down the next post you see from Gary, that's the founder of Best Buy's social network, Blue Shirt Nation, who, is checking out what's happening, and when Best Buy is being mentioned, he doesn't have anything to do with this initiative, but just says, thanks for putting this in. In between Gary's post and this next one, Kevin, someone says, well, I'll bet the terms of service on this new program aren't very good. And Kevin, who I don't know, I do know Gary, says, well, thanks, for the kind words, Josh. This has been in the works for a while, etc. And then down you see at Terry Jones, who is the person who mentioned it, take a look at our terms of service. If it sucks, tell us what's wrong, and we'll try and fix it. I just thought this was very recent. This was just last week. Within a few days, you have this small dialogue, and I don't know if Terry is going to let Kevin know ways to improve the terms of service for developers. So it's just a very powerful way in which, Best Buy is out there, a $40 billion, retailer, and they're out there listening to the market at this close a level. I was really kind of amazed. So find allies. I'd like to share this basic model that I use. Allies are a mixture of trust and agreement, right? So on the left-hand side, you see trust running from a low level of trust down in the lower left to a high level of trust up at the upper left. I should say this is not distrust. This is low level of trust. These aren't people that think you're creepy, right? This is just people that don't know you very well or have a low level of trust down the lower left. Similarly, you have agreement. People who have a low level of agreement with you on the lower left down to the moving out to a positive amount. So obviously in the first quadrant, we have opponents. These are folks who don't really know you, don't trust you, and have a low level of agreement with you, right? Strange bedfellows are great folks to work with because they have a high level of agreement. These might be people in other divisions or other areas of your company that actually agree fundamentally around the value of social tools, social technologies. They might be dabbling with it. They're looking to make a case themselves, but they don't know you very well, right? Those are great people to move into the allies camp. And I would imagine that most people inside of organizations already have some allies, people that are in a high level of agreement and a high level of trust. These are the folks that I'm talking about in terms of moving a project forward. A lot of times I see inside of organizations a single person that says, we've got to do this, without really looking to build any types of alliances. I spoke about Best Buy just earlier. Best Buy self-organized and formed a Web 2.0 Zealots group. And when I went in for the first time working with them, the group is informal. It runs across IT and marketing and and HR, all kinds of divisions. And it's people that are naturally interested that have found each other on this topic. And what was fascinating was I was doing a high-level strategic engagement, and I had to meet with the Web 2.0 Zealots because they hold influence there. And they've self-organized, and that's just a group of allies that have found themselves and now sits in on a lot of decision-making that takes place. So find your allies, whether they're in your business unit or not. And we'll talk in just a minute about worthy adversaries and how they can really help you refine your case. Okay? So in terms of finding allies, some action steps here. Stories, I kind of did this while we were on a pause. Stories that are relevant to your business are really, really important. You can gather them on the internet. You can find case studies all over the place about different companies, whether you're in HR, in R&D, in marketing. You can find a lot of case studies about people that are either using communities, using social networks, using idea exchanges. There are dozens of case studies out there, but you need to select and be able to tell that story in a compelling way to move your business. I feel like one of the big failings that I see is that people get very excited about the technology or the potential of the technology without telling a story that expresses how it can be used. I'm not telling specific stories because we've got a very wide dispersed audience about specifics about, let's say, community. But really gathering those stories and starting to file them away, that's generally what I found to move executives. Find existing social initiatives within your organization. If you have more than 100 people, someone's probably doing something already. Use the social technology to stay in touch with allies. I've used very simple things like wikis where we tag and write up case studies and gather our stories, and just it's a repository for us to talk about this stuff. And then build a common narrative together. Why it's important for your business. Use aspiration or fear. Again, one of the things that I see happen is that we get dislocated from the actual business objectives of our companies. And we see the potential, but we don't actually ground it in terms of saying this is exactly what it could do for us, this is how it aligns to our business goals, our already existing business goals. And these are companies that have done similar things that we could look at as a model. So we'll talk about that in creating a clear project. So the first step in creating a project, if you don't already have one, is to facilitate the conversation. I would suggest you have some allies in that conversation. And this is kind of one of the other second key failure points that I see when people talk about social technologies inside of their companies, is they don't actually facilitate the conversation in a way that leads to positive results. So looking down at the lower left, you see this kind of continuum of possibilities, projects, and results, right? And above, you see there's this area I'm calling divergent thinking, which consists, really, you might think of as brainstorming. Anything is possible. You're identifying issues and opportunities, and you're doing your strategy and planning, right? At that point, you may start to come up with projects, and at that point, right, only once you've fully fleshed out the possibilities do you move into convergent thinking, which is about, risk mitigation, evaluation of benefits, making decisions on priorities, and getting into how much project management of, scope, schedule, and budget. The thing that I see happen is you get, people naturally fall into these different categories by themselves. A lot of people that are already in IT or running mission-critical systems are convergent thinkers by nature. They're the people that are going to say, what are the risks here? How do we kind of mitigate all the risk? And then you have your brainstorm types. You have to facilitate the conversations to start with so that you're in a divergent thinking space. And you'll be talking about the possibility of a community, and someone will say, well, we can't do that because we work in a regulated environment, so we just can't do that. Or legal would never let us do that. it's really good to get explicit and say, right now we're going to do an open-ended conversation. Any kinds of risks or issues we'll put over here to the left in a parking lot, but we're just going to talk about what's possible. We're going to stay in the sense of possibility. And it sounds a little soft and fuzzy, but it's remarkable to watch, because I do a lot of watching of conversations within companies. When you have these convergent thinkers who play a really vital role in the organization, when they get into these conversations, they basically kill the notion of what could be possible by injecting a ton of risk type statements inside. So really facilitate the conversation and stay in a mode that's divergent. The next thing is to align your project with business issues. Here are a set of business issues that companies are typically dealing with, and social technologies can address all of these. So like cycle time, for example, we've seen idea exchanges like Salesforce, IdeaForce, where Salesforce is able to allow its customers to make comments on their software and suggestions, rate and rank those comments, and make suggestions about where the software and how the software can improve. It increased their product cycle time, meaning how quickly they could deliver that product out, by something I think on the order of 50%, and they were able to increase the feature set inside of their software product as well, because obviously they don't need to wonder what customers want. Customers are telling them and voting on it, and they don't have to have internal arguments between engineering and marketing around where the product roadmap should go. So each one of these has, that's an idea exchange, a social technology that then ties to a very, very concrete business issue that you can solve. And most companies are dealing with something around here. So lower customer service costs. We've seen people go out with customer communities or answers type communities as a way to lower the customer service costs. So each one of these can be tied back when you make the case. So really getting a sense of aligning the project with business issues is important. And the thing that I would also say, though, first in terms of just long-term success, is that all of these tools, because they're social, because they're meant to be kind of engage people and have them collaborate and share, it has to provide value to the user first. This sounds incredibly simple, but inside of companies, it is incredibly hard to work yourself out of the mindset of what is this going to do for me. I'll give you a really quick story on this. I was talking to a pharmaceutical company that was really eager to set up a community for their physicians. And they were just, really jazzed on the idea that this was going to create a whole reservoir of best practices for them, for the pharmaceutical company, on how to sell the product, on how to kind of engage physicians to sell the product better, etc. When I tapped into it a little bit further, it became very clear that the physicians hate each other in this particular area. It's a cosmetic surgery. They hate each other. So the very idea that these people would want to contribute best practices or knowledge about how they run their practice was absolutely not going to happen, right? But these guys had gone down fairly far down the road in trying to develop that community, but not looking at all about well, what's the value to the community? Why would someone participate? Are they naturally predisposed to participate? And I've had other people tell me, this is an exaggeration, but I want to form a community for the rural, elderly, poor, right? Well, those folks aren't necessarily online, and they aren't sharing as much. So really understanding who your user is and what benefit that might be to them, if they're even up on some of these tools and technologies, is a critical starting point. Because it's not like I make a social technology recommendation for every client that I walk into. Some folks may not be the best fit, may not be the best time, or you may want to go with a much smaller type of solution. Seek challenge. This is where, in our model, you can start with your allies and say, what types of challenges are we going to reach? The other piece, I think, is the worthy adversaries, people who you know very well, have a high degree of trust, but low agreement. Really get together and understand what types of challenges are going to occur inside of your business. I'm going to give you a couple of common ones. These are the most common. I'd love to share these on the blog afterwards and just start to try and address them as I address them or in specific circumstances. These are very generic, but the most common ones that I get. So sharing bad news, meaning we're going to get negative comments in a public place. So customers are going to air their dissatisfaction in a public way. And I'm going to give you my sample answers in just a minute to these. Leaking intellectual property. Well, we're going to give away something, that we shouldn't, right? Loss of message control means we're not going to control the brand in the same way. That could be customers. That could also be employees, meaning, I don't want the employees talking about the new health benefits policy in a public way. Wasted time, right? So there's no return on investment for this. It's a waste of time, either that, wasting employee time or that there's just no ROI on it. And losing competitive advantage is a really common one. So let's say I'm going to, have basically an idea exchange that I talked about earlier, where customers can come in, give their ideas, rate and rank them. Aren't I just giving away that advantage and that roadmap to my customers? So this is a very common set of them. And here's a very genericized set of kind of responses. So the first one is very standard, meaning they're already doing it somewhere else. They're already sharing their negative comments or airing their dissatisfaction somewhere else. If it's your, we can talk about employees, they're already doing it in ways that you don't get a visibility on, right? With customers, the same thing. And the question really is, shouldn't we be engaging them on our own terms? The hardest piece about bringing social technologies into organizations, in my opinion, is that it requires a different mental model of how a company operates. It has much more transparency, and it's got a lot more candor. And what it does for companies that are willing to take it on is it gives them a set of new challenges and things to work on, right? So they can get that bad news and deal with it. But it is a challenge. Leaking intellectual property. These issues are already present in the other forms of communication we have, and they're actually less auditable. So from a standpoint of blogging or other types of ways of reaching out and distributing potentially your intellectual property, I think this is really a non-issue because it's yet more of the same, and companies can establish pretty simple guidelines. And most employees, when they're launching something public, to be honest, are, in my experience, more careful on social technologies than they are on email, which is, email can also go viral, or email can be shared in ways that you don't want. Loss of message control. I would say, depending on your business, you may not be in control now, and the same issue exists already for every other form of communication, right? So the idea of kind of brand control, I think, represents a notion of a past world. Your brand now is very much about customer experience, and I think the more you allow customers to share on a platform that you're dialed into or part of, the more powerful it is. Sorry, I just did that. Okay. Shut that. I had a 15-minute thing. So losing competitive advantage, I would say growing your business in collaboration with your customers builds a stronger business. And if you can't deliver competitively on what they're asking for, be careful. I get this a lot that, we're going to lose our critical advantage, which is how we see the product developing. And I think that the critical advantage is actually moved away from that towards the ability to successfully engage customers about it and execute upon it more quickly. And so I think just having that conversation, these are kind of 5 ways that I short-circuit some of the common challenges, or at least ask a deeper set of questions around whether or not those challenges really exist. Make the case. Business is business, and by that I mean that, because these things are new, we tend to want to talk about them in very aspirational, lofty terms, but businesses, if you're making a case for a project, have some pretty specific ends that they're trying to meet. And so I try and package social initiatives in a very common business language, which is, what's the opening line? Meaning, what is the title of the project? I know that sounds, these are stories again. Give a clear, compelling title to your project. So, establishing a customer community to lower, support costs by X, What is the business rationale? So again, going back to the business objectives, how you're tying it to direct business objectives. Who needs to be involved? Often critical to understand who should be in support of it. Challenges, again, to kind of go through that and understand that the frequently asked concerns that you're going to get and being able to address them. So how will we overcome them and be very direct about that? I think a lot of times I don't see people structure these projects very tightly in terms of how they pitch the business. And metrics, how we know that we've succeeded. There are a lot of standard ways to measure things that align with your goals, and try to measure as you would anything else. I know that there's some softness in terms of measuring communities, but each one of these, customer support, innovation, marketing, has a traditional way of measuring. See if you can align it with that, and if it makes sense with your business goals. If it doesn't, see if there's another way to start aligning it with a metric of engagement or other. Public relations obviously is one of the squishiest ones because it's just about exposure. So blogging kind of relates a lot to what PR tries to get done. Marketing, has a lot to do with customer intimacy and insight. So communities can start to bring that forward, right? I'm moving a little bit more quickly so we can get to questions. We always run out of time. Here's some other things just to keep in mind. I'm a big fan of pilots and starting things small. And I think that is a great way to do it and say we want to run a small pilot. We want to run it with a controlled group of people who are generally going to be allies. And they provide you a model. But I want to put this out there to you that you still, in a hierarchical organization, you still need to change your culture to make bigger changes and to allow yourself to kind of open up to the greater possibility of these, or the more transformational possibilities here, right? And I'm less and less convinced as I've moved through this now for 4 or 5 years. I'm less and less convinced that it's just a bottom-up, completely bottom-up, pilot-driven, skunkworks-driven thing. I look at the organizations I've been in that are really successful with it, Best Buy being one of them. They have a culture that rewards a level of entrepreneurship and risk-taking, and they try and learn from their mistakes. And it's still hard in those environments, but I think trying to move towards an idea where leadership can help you make those changes is a big goal. Consider the long tail of your commitment means that when you open up one of these platforms, it usually takes a little while to get mass, and you'll consider what it's going to take after you launch it. If you're listening to customers and responding, who's going to be responding? How much time does that take? Business is usually, already completely consumed. So how much is it really going to take for you is an important consideration. Enterprise 2.0, if you're looking to go inside the company, look to replace systems. Don't add new ones. This is huge. If you're trying to get knowledge management through a wiki, don't have them use their project management software and then go to the wiki and annotate what they've done. It won't work. You need to think about replacing a system with a social one. And think in the flow means in the flow of their everyday work, right? If you replace the system, as a byproduct, let's say it's a wiki for project management, it's part of their normal work, and it's going to happen in the flow of their work as opposed to above the flow. So that's kind of a critical piece in Enterprise 2.0, using these tools inside the organization. Stay benefit focused, but don't get thrown if you aren't solving every single problem. So often I find people say, well, we're going to have 40 wikis in our thing, and how do we consolidate? Well, how do we go to one system? Do we choose a suite that has every application? These are problems that exist in business already. Social technologies don't necessarily solve the fact that people use different tools in different distributed ways across organizations. I wouldn't try and tackle that one first. I would try and build success first and then deal with the thing that everyone already deals with in companies, which is, well, we've got lots of different systems. I wouldn't make that your primary issue first. And then beware of lagging indicators. We talked about this before. Companies that require case studies for any new initiative will by definition lag. This is the final model that aligns kind of these 5 steps with this model of moving from divergent to convergent. I'm going to make these slides available to you, so if this is helpful, you can kind of use this in projects that you might run. And that opens us up to questions. And Catherine, anything that's there? I wanted to say, again, you can email me and let me know if it's okay for me to put it on the blog, because email kind of isolates that conversation to one person. There are a lot of people on this phone call that have different types of issues. I'd love to be able to put them onto the blog at opposableplanets.com and just kind of continue that conversation.
I think that's a great idea. We have quite a few good questions here, Josh. I've been posting them so everyone can scroll through and read them, and people feel free to send in more questions as we talk about this. So let me start. There's one from Mireille. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right. And she appears to be studying, taking several courses in social networking, and one of them has 2,000 people in it. And she wants to know, what sort of questions should she be asking that can draw stories of how people are using these networks?
What types of questions specifically she can ask to take in stories of, let me just ask her to clarify, case studies or stories of success with the social network?
I'm not sure. Morel, is that what you mean? Case studies from people, their success stories? Is that what you're hoping to get? We'll see if she answers. And how people are using Web 2.0 in their environment. So I believe that she is asking about success stories.
Right. Well, I think if I get the question right, there's already an existing social network with some relationships. I would say first, if she tried to just simply, if she's got relationships with those people, put them out. I mentioned on LinkedIn, I have about close to 1 million people on my LinkedIn account. I actually just put general questions out to the universe, and when there's a large group of people, it's kind of shocking how many people will actually answer you. It's something you don't really think about until you do it, and you realize that people are willing to kind of answer questions and dig in. What I would say to her is, if the people in the group are similarly dedicated to studying this stuff, that shouldn't be a hard sell to say, look, I'm collecting some questions, and she may want to frame it. You may want to frame it in a way that allows people to understand exactly what she's looking for. If it's, if she's focused on social networks inside the enterprise, say, do you know anybody who's deploying these inside of companies to gain advantage, or if they're looking at deploying them outside, just get more specific about what stories you're looking for. But I don't think I have much more advice than to just start asking.
Okay. Then another one from Andrew early in the presentation. He asked, is it enough to search the blogosphere with available online tools? He's asking about, what about specialized new applications that are popping up to crawl the web and find everything? Can you recommend some of those? What do you think of them?
Yeah, I actually think that they're good. And I didn't want to go there at first, because the first step, I think, is just to start getting a sense. The reason I put listening on this level was that I've seen and helped people build cases inside of businesses to say, look, there's more going on out there than you think. And that is the first step, to kind of say that here's some stories and here's some ways in which our company is perceived or is being talked about. Absolutely, if you start getting to a place where this becomes an integrated part of your business, there are tools like Buzzmetrics. There's a series of tools that you can use to kind of harvest all of that information, and some of these groups actually apply some pretty cool technology to it, which you might call sentiment mining, meaning they look at the overall flavor of what's happening. They can give you a dashboard saying, look, there's a lot of positivity associated with your brand and with your products, or negativity, or here are tags of words and things being used, and that can be really helpful. But it's definitely a whole other order of magnitude in terms of managing it. Now, so I'm fully in favor of those for larger companies that want to take care of it. They're not cheap. And I do believe that the first step really inside of a company is to start gathering these stories themselves and understanding what's being spoken about. And it's if you want to build your case that we need one of those, it'd be great to use these listening tools first to say, look, there's a ton of conversation out here about us, and we really need a better way to kind of put this into a dashboard for leadership.
And on that question, Helen is asking about the strengths of the specific tools that are used for monitoring the online conversation, and are any better than others, because there are so many of them?
To be very candid, I don't have a specialty in those vendors. I wouldn't mind having that. What's that?
Experiment, ask other people, or?
Well, I would say one of the things, one of the folks that, I guess my answer is that I wouldn't put myself in a position of telling you which vendor is better. I would just kind of look at those tools and see what it is you're trying to get from them, because they have different orders of sophistication. Some of them just kind of crawl and give you reports. Others do what I said, which is kind of the more kind of complex analysis of what that conversation is. And if you're actually looking for them, I would have them start to pitch you. I mean, it's free to just kind of start to listen in and see if that's going to meet your goals. I think I'm just going to leave it there, because I'm not an expert there, and I don't want to kind of tell you which tool to look for.
Okay. And then we have Mark, who was asking about a specific point, a couple points you made. He said, it's the same Mark who asked about information overload. And actually, I don't think I gave you that question. He was saying he doesn't disagree that peer-to-peer publishing is on the rise, but in a world of information overload, what's your perspective on the kind of publishers that can monitor and filter information to prevent us from information overload? So I think that ties into what you just answered. But how do you, when you're out there collecting information about your company and business, or how do you filter?
How do you manage that? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, generally speaking, when it depends on kind of if you're an individual or a company. At a company level, I think they start to use tools that will aggregate and filter things. To the earlier caller's question, you can do that. I think in terms of doing research and understanding what's happening, people increasingly subscribe to other people as filters. So from my perspective, I filter my information through kind of trusted people on the blogosphere who are already doing that type of work. So I kind of look at social media as being a giant filter, and I kind of look at what emerges at the end of that pipe, and I don't try and trawl it all, and I'm not looking at press releases. I kind of wait for specific sources that I kind of trust. So in a sense, to be honest with you, I kind of look at social media as a giant filter for me, and I start to establish my trusted sources, and I have them go out and do that work for me first. Okay.
Do you have time for a few more questions?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, because there's a lot of interesting ones. Let's see. Alan asked a question. He says, listening's great and even easy when things are going well, but when businesses have a problem, they often resort to traditional defensive tactics. And he would like to have an entire session on how companies successfully handle worst-case scenarios. And then another person, Tom, jumped in and said he'd be interested in your thoughts regarding social media for companies in difficult times. Their instinct is to revert to putting their heads in the sand. Mm-hmm. So I don't know that that's a question.
Those are two such great, it's so, webcasts for me are so hard because we're not in some interactive conversation, which is why I wanted to tell everybody that the blog address, because I will respond to those and answer questions in detail and have more of a conversation that's a little bit more two-way. one of the things I talk about with companies, I run through something called the 7 deadly sins, which is the knee-jerk reactions companies have to social media and how it threatens their way of doing business. And I think that what Alan said is really powerful, because companies are structured to behave in a certain way, and kind of their behavior follows that structure. So you have marketing and PR and these traditional arms that are really talking arms of the organization. They're advocacy arms. And you have customer service, which actually engages our customers, that is usually the first thing to be outsourced and the lowest paid, right? And so I'm a big advocate that companies need to look at this shift in power towards customers, and what does it mean to be customer-centric in this multicast world. And it's not just about, this is neat technology, use it. It actually has structural implications, saying, look, we're going to have to, every part of our organization is now a marketing part, meaning it is intimately involved in how products get to our customers. And customer insight and engagement is really critical. So it's almost like doing organizational psychology and saying, look, these are the kinds of questions you're going to come up with, and let's try and get ahead of them in a neutral environment and say, what are you going to do? I went through this kind of challenges, and that's actually the exact reason I wanted to surface those challenges. And I think each person needs to do that, because it's one thing to say, look at all the promise this can have for us. But if you aren't clear about the different challenges that you're going to face, and up front you kind of establish those boundary conditions and say, we may get some negativity. We may get customers, if let's say we're in retail, that are saying our manufacturers are terrible. What are we going to do about that? And there are constructive ways to handle that, or at least get ahead of it, so that when that, the worst time to make a decision on this stuff is in the heat of the moment, because business will revert back to its behavior. And that's kind of why I really, in this model, said surface your challenges and go to your worthy adversaries and surface those challenges first, and get a clearer sense of this is gonna be the ways that it will challenge our business, but we still think it's worth it. So
that's great. Boy, we're running over time, but there are a couple more questions. I would love it if you could answer them. It seems
I'm fine.
Okay, all right. Let me see. John has asked, he made an interesting point. It used to be that you used to have a website for when you were a company or anyone out in the world. So have blogs made that advice obsolete?
I'm sorry, say that again, Catherine?
It used to be that if you were a company or any kind of organization, you had to have a website, back in the old days.
Mm-hmm.
But have blogs made that obsolete?
No, not at all.
Okay.
I think that the kind of these new technologies stimulate interaction between people, and there is definitely a role for a company to have a claim, to make a statement, and to kind of say what it's about, and ways. I mean, it depends on the company, obviously, but not everything is a conversation. However, what I would say to you is that there are ways to look at your website, even if it's not an e-commerce site, and say, how do I engage the energy, talent, passion of people around me? And there are lots of cases, but you think of a simple case like Fiskars with the scissors company, who formed a community around people that were enthusiastic about scissors, and they're called the Fiskateers. And they kind of cleaved this off and said, over here is our community, and here's our scissor company. The community, if you don't, just type in Fiskateers, Fiskateers, in Google, and you'll find it. It's an extraordinarily vibrant community about people that are dedicated to crafting with these scissors, these high-end scissors. You can start looking at, how do I promote these interactions with my customers, stakeholders, partners, whoever it is, and how might I bring that conversation back to my website? So we're starting to see certain companies bringing that social interaction onto their websites itself. So that could be in the form of a blog. That could be in the form of surfacing some community content on the homepage. That could be as simple as ratings and reviews, allowing people to make comments about the products and services that are available. So I think really the question is not do I get rid of the website, but rather how does the website harness the potential outside my organization for interaction, enthusiasm, information? That's really the way the question should be posed, I think.
That's great. And those are great scissors, too, by the way.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, they are.
But let's take one more question. We have one from Blaine that I think is really quite interesting. He says his challenge is presenting the concept of decentralization through Web 2.0 in a public company that focuses on centralization. And I think that that's something a lot of people have to deal with. And just, John, let me see. John is also asking, aren't legal issues always a barrier to adopting social media methods? And I think those two go hand in hand, so
yeah.
Maybe you can address them together.
Well, there's a great, and it may be that you've already read The Starfish and the Spider, which talks about, the whole point of that book is about decentralized systems and how powerful they can be, but they can coexist within. There's a balance between kind of these centralized functions and decentralized, and I think that's a huge underlying point between all of this is that networks are fairly decentralized and they distribute kind of computing power, or let's call it brain power, let's call it creativity, let's call it collaboration, out to the edges where there's more people to contribute than keeping it all inside. But it's a big trade-off. Companies need to look at what they give away in order to do that. A great example I like to look at is Barack Obama, actually, who gives away voter lists, which used to be sacred intellectual property for a campaign. But they distribute that out to volunteers because they realize that in a decentralized model, there's a lot more power in giving that asset up because they get the energy of volunteer people to actually take an action on it. So I think it really is about a company-specific balance, about saying, look, there's a lot of powerful potential, and it gets back to facilitating that conversation, right? That if you inject the legal conversation in what's possible, or you inject the structural conversation, the hierarchical conversation, the centralized kind of thing, the way we do things here, into the conversation too early, it really kills a lot of potential. And so if you can navigate this by saying, let's just open a window here to talk about, do we all agree that there's really some powerful potential? And use examples like, I'm using a political one, that wouldn't be the right one in terms of your case, but use Gold Corp, which gave away all of its geological data for anyone to tell them where the gold was, and they couldn't find the gold. When they gave it out to everyone, said, look, we'll give anyone who has a winning idea $500,000, they found something on the order of billions of dollars of gold. So the first case study in economics. Use that story and say, can we all agree that this is potential, and facilitate what's possible, find out what's possible. Legal to me is just about actually closing the loop with those people. Generally speaking, my discovery is that most people will play along if they understand what the game is about. But if they don't, that's when you have legal just kind of separately, as a separate arm, kind of come in and shut things down, because their job is on that convergent side. Their job is to mitigate risk, right? So if you haven't brought them into that conversation and said, how could we work to do this in such a way that, look, here's the possibilities. Legal doesn't want to be in the business of killing possibility, right? They just need to be in the business of keeping the business operational. So I think kind of co-opting, and this is about building allies. We didn't talk about this today, but that's about moving all these folks together into this level of agreement and trust. You build trust through personal relationship, and you build agreement through stories. So I think building allies with legal is really powerful.
Great. Well, I think that's all we'll take for today, because we've gone a little bit over. Most people don't have time for...
Yes, understood. I thank you very much. And what I would say is, anyone who wants to ask additional questions, I'm going to post this slideshow as well, and we're going to make that available. And ask any questions you want. I'd love to kind of continue that conversation on that URL.
Okay, I sent that URL around through the chat window. And I also want to tell everyone that Josh is going to do another webcast for us later this month. We'll send you the details once it's available. It's going to be a very interesting one, much more in depth than this is, with a lot of chance to interact with Josh and ask him specific questions about your personal situation. And so we'll send you news about that once we have it ready. And also, thank you for joining us, but there will be a brief survey that shows after we finish this presentation. We'd love for you to take it because we appreciate your feedback, and you're not obligated to, of course, but we do, to encourage you to take it, we have a contest where we pick 3 winners that get to have the book of their choice from O'Reilly, so you have a chance to win a free book. And thank you very much, Josh. It was, fascinating and learned a lot as usual. So thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thanks to everyone, and I look forward to hearing from different people. All right, thanks a lot.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.